Howdy folks, welcome back to the Steampunk Desperado channel. I am on a roll. This is like my third week in a row where I'm getting a show out and it's a review. And this one, being it's an alternate week, I'm going to alternate steampunk and non-steampunk as long as I can. This is a non-steampunk, in fact it's a zombie apocalypse series. And it's not one of the most famous ones. You know, it's not World War Z, although I do plan to read that. I actually met the author of that, Mel Brooks' son, who's a very nice guy. It's not that one. It's not anything to do with Walking Dead, which is a very exciting series. I saw a few episodes till it was making my blood pressure go too high. It is something I discovered as part of an ebook promotion, which is a good place to look for stuff. The name of the series is the Z-Day series by Daniel Humpreys. As I said, I discovered this book, or at least the first book, in an ebook promotion. This was a promotion of books that were featured at Dragon Con in Atlanta, an annual science fiction convention. And this is a place where they actually have more of a variety of ideologies. A lot of these cons have become dominated by left-wing wokies. And Dragon Con is one of the few places where, you know, conservatives and libertarians and other people are given a fair shake. Also, a lot more independents get heard, I think, because several of the people in this list were independent writers. The first book was called A Place Outside the Wild, and it almost got an award. It was like a finalist for post-apocalyptic fiction. Again, written by Daniel Humpreys. And there are 3 of these books, all having the word place in the title. And furthermore, there's an anthology called Places Beyond the Wild that came out a little bit later. But I'll get into the different books in a bit. First, the premise. Z-Day, which is why the series is named Z-Day, was a day in October of 2017. Yes, this first book was published in 2017, when 99% of the world's population was wiped out, was succumbing to a zombie plague. In other words, this is a zombie apocalypse book. And I haven't read a lot of these, though I have read a lot of those nuclear war stories that were big in the 70s. So I have a little bit of a perspective on it. Most of the action, the current action in the book, takes place 8 years after Z-Day, when things have settled down a little bit. There's a group of resilient farmers and survivalists who created this community in southeastern Indiana, near Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's kind of a rural area, and some of the farmers, and there were some survivalists, and they put together this walled community where they can grow crops and survive. And so they're kind of getting along. Now there are flashbacks to the actual event, people remembering what happened to them in those harrowing times, but I like the fact that it's a little bit different. It starts after the big action, dealing with the aftermath, and it's a lot longer than 28 days later. So this is a small town, but throughout the first book it has no name. Eventually, at the end, they call it Hope, which is very appropriate. There's a few hundreds of people, maybe 1,000, I don't know. Most of them are white, but there is some diversity because that's the way that even rural America is right now. I'm not pro or con of diversity in books. I think it should fit the circumstance. Now this town has a huge wall around it. It also has a watchtower with a sniper's nest, something you don't have in a lot of towns these days. And they have that manned all the time so they can shoot zombies that get too near the walls. And this walled area has enough room, I think, probably 1,000 acres or more, to grow crops. And they have a few animals like hogs and chickens, but no cattle. Sorry, no beef. People miss that. They fuel their vehicles with biodiesel, but obviously they don't have, you know, enough fuel to do pleasure trips with that. They make frequent forays. They have armed groups of mostly men who go into the surrounding communities to find stuff. Because a lot of stuff will last a while, and the people who are using it aren't around anymore. And so they bring back stuff people need, especially like pharmaceuticals and so on, and canned foods, and sometimes tools and other equipment that they might be able to use. Zombies, however, are still a threat. The threat has wound down a lot because a lot of them have just plain worn down after 8 years, but there are some that are still around. They seem to be effectively immortal. They don't need food, and that is human beings. They kind of go into this hibernation, and when a human comes by, they wake up and try to bite you. And to be bit is to die. The bites are always fatal. The person turns within a few hours, and your friends and family have to shoot you. That's just the way it is. However, there was this one guy in the community, when he's a major character, for some reason is immune. He was bit by his wife and son when they turned. It's a very scary and poignant scene, and for some reason he never turned. More about him later. I believe they need to be shot in the brain to die, to really die. Now, these zombies are slow shamblers. They're stupid, they're like animals, they just want to feed. And they'll go on until they're stopped by getting shot. At this point, 8 years after Z-Day, it appears like they might finally be able to rebuild society. They might finally be able to open the walls, they might finally be able to clear the zombies out. But it just so happens that they're starting to behave differently. They're starting to organize. They're starting to plan. You might see a zombie like hiding to ambush somebody like an animal might do, rather than like a smart animal might do, like a panther, not like a stupid animal like an alligator or a shark. And so they're becoming a greater threat all of a sudden. Now, this is the premise. Before I go any further, I'm going to talk a little bit about the author, Dan Humphreys. He's a regular guy. He's a family man. He lives in Indiana, of course, because that's why I think he set it in Indiana. And he's a sci-fi fan. He's a target shooter. He likes to tinker with computers, things I like as well. He has spent his entire career in corporate IT, and appropriately so, one of the major characters is a former IT guy. I'm a computer guy too, so I can relate. And so, as I said, I'm going to go through the four books now. First book, Place Outside the Wild, 2016. Z-Book, Book 1. It was a 2017 Dragon Award finalist for a post-apocalyptic novel. And that's the book that establishes the setting and the major characters. The settlement, as I said, was nameless throughout, but it's finally given the name of Hope, which makes perfect sense. And it kind of introduces that new threat of the smarter and more organizable, the more sociable zombies, let's say. The second book is called A Place Called Hope, published in 2017. Good name, good name. You're almost wondering what are they going to name it, but it's not a spoiler because they named the second book after them, right? Second book gives new hope to Hope as a lone Marine Corps detachment arrives in time to save the day. The zombies have been breaching the walls in this case, and there was a traitor within who was, sabotaging the community just for his own selfish reasons. And so it's a very exciting scene in that case. This book adds a new character who was kind of trapped in Cincinnati, I think, as part of the corporate world and managed to escape. He's like a doctor of biology or something like that, and he worked for this kind of sinister, shady biomedical firm, so people don't trust him. They think he might have something to do with this business. But he has to prove himself. And that book was called A Place Called Hope, 2017. Third book, A Place for War, 2018. And as the title suggests, there's a lot more action with the surviving elements of the U.S. military. A lot of it was Navy, who had cleared out some of the islands. And as bases, they cleared out the zombies. So there's islands from the Caribbean to Kodiak Island by Alaska and so on. In that case, the bears kind of helped. Bears hate zombies. And there are other communities they get in touch with, that join the fight. One of my favorites is this bunch of people who are living on a pier in Los Angeles because there was this surfer dude and was fleeing, and he meets this group of people who were on a pleasure fishing boat, and so they wall off the end of the pier, and they're able to survive there on fish, and taking the boat out when they can. I think they would run out of fuel, but whatever. And so they're even having kids on this pier, and they rarely get to leave because there are so many zombies still alive in LA. But the big threat in the third book is the smart zombies, and they seem to be having control from outside of their herd, or maybe from some outstanding member in the zombie community. And it's a big threat, and they want to take them out. It's like a climax. The military is going to do it. They're going to get rid of them all. America, rah rah! So, major characters. Charlie Maddox, who's the guy who was immune, and he lost his wife and son in the zombie apocalypse, and since then he's been kind of a loner, kind of mistrusted. Miles Matthews, and I think he's finally modeled a little bit on Dan, who is married to a doctor. I think she was pre-med or a nurse or a dentist or something like that when the plague hit, and now she has to be a full-fledged GP doctor. And the daughter Trina. Now he's white, she's black, so here's part of the diversity. And her father is still in the community. He's a crusty old veteran who gives a lot of advice and offers his skills. Speaking of veterans, we have Uncle Pete, who mans the crow's nest, is what they call the sniper tower, and he mans that a lot of times because he has no legs. He's got fake legs, and that kind of pains him to walk around. He's very self-aware of that, so he spends a lot of his time alone looking for zombies. Although they do have other people who man that tower, and he's the one who teaches the kids marksmanship because they have live targets that they can shoot at, which is cool. There is a Sikh named Veer, part of the diversity, and he's a fun character. He's very smart, very resourceful, very heroic. Sikhs are a warrior culture. They're a warrior religion, and so I like the inclusion of them. But it's a little unrealistic because I think he's like kind of a lapsed Sikh because he eats meat, and I think they're supposed to be vegetarians, actually. And finally, we have Dr. Sandy Scopulus. He's the guy from Cincinnati who was in the biomedical firm who's escaped, and he's kind of acting as a quasi-doctor as well because he knows a few things. And he's the guy who kind of has to prove himself because people don't trust him. There's a lot of military characters who are significant and important people in the book, but I don't remember them that well because they kind of all blend together. Your name and the rank, and there's the leadership and so on. And you have to get in the book to actually experience that. Now, pros and cons. First pro is that I remember many of the scenes, and that's important. There's stuff that I remember like 50 years later from books where I read them as a kid. And if that's the case, then that's good writing. There are other books that are good and celebrated that you don't remember much at all. I remember very little of William Gibson's Neuromancer. I just remember the one very perverse scene about a daughter being woken from cold sleep, and I won't go into it. But as though Gibson's very cerebral, not as action-oriented, let's say. So there's a lot of these scenes, I will always remember them. The characters, they're great. They are very varied. They have human flaws, so they're very believable, but there's all types. They're the good, almost selfless heroes. They're the cowards who kind of hide behind this community that's sacrificed for them. They're the Karens who want to run everything, of course. They're savage highwaymen who will murder and rob and everything just for their own selfish gratification. There are sociopathic villains who want to destroy everything. And some people do die. Some of the good guys do too. So it's exciting because you never know who will survive and who won't. The kids are great characters. The daughter Trina is the most significant one. And she is participating in this foray by the kids to one of the neighboring suburbs. Now, of course, they're not allowed, but they do it without permission because they want to retrieve some mementos for one of the kids who's missing his dead parents. And they have some very scary experiences on the way. I won't go into it. I don't want to ruin it. I like those gripping scenes. Where kids in danger, that's very, very meaningful to a lot of people. Anybody with kids especially. Now, the diversity is there, but it's not overplayed. They don't go on about racism and junk like that, like in a lot of modern woke novels. The black characters are resilient and self-reliant, which is the way I like people in general. It keeps up the tension, and there are, again, still scenes I remember. My favorite one is when Veer, the Sikh, is trapped on a roof of a store. I think it was some kind of supermarket, maybe. And the yo-yos that he was with were kind of flakes. They let down their guard, and the zombies got him. So he's there by himself on top of this roof, and he's got a gun, but limited ammunition. There's all these zombies swarming the store. Now, they didn't used to do that. This is scary. This is chilling because they were just shamblers, and now they almost seem to be working together. So will Veer survive? That's the question. There's a lot about firearms and blowing crap up, which is great, especially in the end when the military is blowing crap up, which is even better. And finally, most importantly, I love the secret to the zombie plague, which you will eventually discover. I won't give it away, but when you read about it, you will say, aha! That's all I'm going to say about it. Now here are the cons. There are a few, as with everything. There are too many characters. Too many characters, which means there's a lot of story threads, a lot of different POV shifts, and sometimes it's a little hard to keep track. It can be frustrating too, because like when Veer is on top of the store, you say, is he going to survive? You don't know because we shift to a different character. I know television likes to do that, and so it's something I'm sure he picked up from television and movies, and I found it frustrating. Some of the characters and some of the tropes are a little stereotypical. Not entirely bad. There's a little bit too much rah-rah military. Although you do see some balance to that. Like a lot of the military was incompetent, which is why so many of them died. So it's not entirely bad. There is no knowledge of the rest of the world. This is my biggest gripe in a lot of these type of books. That's the deal. It's only America, and there's nothing else. Now, I understand it's going to be difficult in this kind of situation to even think about what's happening in Germany or Zimbabwe or Ecuador. Of course you won't. But you think, like, what is happening in the rest of the world? Did anybody else survive like this? Are there other militaries or governments that had, a few ragtag people in the loop here? I kind of think that the Russians and the Chinese, at the very least, and maybe the Brits, would have people who would be surviving. Oh, and especially the Australians. Of course, the Australians. But, because they're kind of, a little bit more sparse. Now, of course, you won't see that in these novels, but just a little bit of mention or just a little bit of thought about it might make the thing more realistic. Perhaps some of the stories, some of the follow-up stories, they might address that. I don't know. But all we hear about it is that the U.S. soldiers who were deployed overseas mostly got killed when the populations, native populations, and most of the other soldiers turned. And so that's about all you hear. Otherwise, it's just like the U.S. is the only thing in the world. They do go through Canada at one point, through the St. Lawrence Seaway. And so, finally, the establishment of hope seems a little improbable. I mean, the zombies are so threatening, and there's so many of them at the beginning. All these people could come together and create something that's going to last. Who knows? But then again, it's a big country, so it is possible. So that is my review of Dan Humphreys' Z-Day series with the books. Place Outside the Wild, Place Called Hope, Place for War, and finally the anthology, Place Beyond the Wild, which I did not read. I would give it, in general, as a series, 4.5 gears out of 5 because I had to detract for the vast number of characters. Too many, in my view. It's just one of my pet peeves. though I do highly recommend it. I do hope some of you read it, and I love to support other independent authors, especially when they're good. A lot of terrible self-published stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff out there too. Please let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Please check out my books on Amazon. I'll put a list in there below in the notes, and I am working on getting a couple more out, hopefully within the next year, because it's been a while. Please like and subscribe. That helps us get out the good steampunk word. For now, this is Steampunk Desperado saying adios amigos from the Steampunk Desperado channel, where the past meets the future and the present is extraordinary.